Hi, I'm Nathan from Serious Geeks, and today's video is going to be about unit sizes in Warhammer 40,000 and what we're most likely to see. In the new edition of Warhammer 40,000, 9th edition, there are plenty of reasons to change up how we build our army lists. The most notable new rules that are in place that will change the game are the Blast special rules, unit coherency, and character special rules, as well as peripheral things to that which don't have a direct effect, but if you want to be, playing the best you can, you do have to bear them in mind, and I will cover them at the end. First up, we have blast weapons. A weapon that is a blast weapon will get a random number of shots, which we're used to from 8th edition. However, it will be affected differently depending on the target it's firing at, because it is a blast weapon. If it's firing at units that are 6 or more in number, so basically a lot of units in the game, it will score a minimum of 3 shots per weapon. This means if a weapon is firing D6 shots, anything lower than a 3 will count as a 3. And if a weapon is firing D3 shots, like plasma cannons, it will count the full 3 shots as how many shots it fires, which is, as you can probably understand, very powerful. If the unit is over 10 strong, that increases to the full maximum amount, which means if you're firing, say, a frag missile that fires D6 shots, 1 dice amount of shots, you will get the full 6 per missile launcher being fired. That is also very powerful, and it will change the way people look at units. Horde armies that would often take 30 strong units, they're going to suffer a lot of casualties just because there are a lot of models. I mean, the idea is they're all bunched together, so they get nuked by all these blast weapons all at once, which, it does make sense. This weapon type alone is going to heavily influence a lot of players' decision making, but I don't think it should be the be-all and end-all, and I'll explain why in a sec. It does appear that you would want to minimise the amount of damage to your army, so you'd, as an example, take several smaller units that add up to the same total number of models as the actual large unit that you're taking. But this will affect your army quite noticeably. You might need to take an extra battalion or another detachment, which will take up command points. These units will also be vulnerable to being taken out and destroyed, which would potentially net more victory points to the opponent. Lots of micromanaging needs to be done with these units, so there are negatives to them, and we do have to bear that in mind when we play them. Command point usage for stratagems is also a negative to taking lots of small units, in that you spend a command point to boost up the shooting of 1 unit, but it's only affecting 6 models or 5 models. When if the unit was a full strength, like say 25, 30 strong unit, they all get affected by it, which, depending on your army and your stratagem usage, it's a major change and it's a major difference. So we do have to bear that in mind. So if we minimise our unit vulnerability to blast weapons, how will that affect the rest of the army, the rest of the game? Well, as I mentioned, it will potentially change your unit composition, your army composition. You might have to spend more command points, which means you'd have less to play around with versus your opponent potentially. Also, having smaller units means that they can be taken below a crucial threshold. A character can only be protected by the lookout sir rule if the unit that is around them, the closer unit to the enemy, is 3 or larger in strength. Now, this may not seem like a lot, but if you have a load of 5-man units, say you have 3 5-man units in front of your character, each unit only needs 3 casualties, so that's a total of 9 models removed out of 15 for all the protection that they give you to be removed. And then that basically is fairly terminal to the character. Once those models are dead, through small arms fire no doubt, all the rest of the fire can go in on the character. And if you have a crucial warlord character or someone, giving you your psychic defense, Gilliman, for example, you have an orc war boss there giving bonuses to all the orcs around him or about to get into close combat, you could potentially lose that model, especially with some of the firepower that Warhammer 40,000 has in spades in just about every army. Had there been a single unit that was 15 models strong instead of 3 units that were 5 strong, that character would have been protected, even though it lost 9 models in 1 turn potentially. So, we do have to bear these things in mind, despite the blast rules. The last factor is probably going to be the unit coherency check. Now, because of the unit coherency check and the requirement to keep every model within at least 2 inches of 2 other models in a large unit that is over a certain size, in this case 6 strong, it can be quite difficult to get all your models into the right position. But I think it's very doable. I don't think this is going to be too much of a block. It's more going to be just careful placement of, of your model, and also removal of models as well. When you lose models, you have to take them from certain areas. So when you deploy a unit, where you actually place the models in that initial setup should be bearing in mind where the casualties are going to come from. So, giving you some advice on this, what I would recommend is if you place a unit that is 6 or greater on the table, make sure that all the models that you want to take as casualties very first are in the same part of the unit. So if you've got to get a bit closer to get in range, if you're, say, Space Marine Tactical Squad, and you have a plasma gun, a heavy bolter, and a combi plasma, plus 7 other Marines, put the 7 other Marines all on one side and the weapons that you want in range all on another, which you don't want to take the casualties from, and then that way you know that the casualties are going to come away from those models, but also not compromise the whole unit as a whole under the unit coherency rule. This is just as true for orcs. If you're trying to surge forward in a big horde, big mob of boys, put all the casualties that you're prepared to take off in the same section, so they're not strung out along the line, and then you end up running afoul of the unit coherency rule. This is actually going to be the new norm, and I don't think it's going to be an issue for most people. Unit coherency will be about clearing up units that have already weakened and damaged, rather than, oops, I've made a mistake kind of situations. Most players should know this intuitively very quickly, and I think it will only take a couple of games falling afoul of it to teach anyone. So, after all that, what do I think will be unit composition in an army? What kind of sizes? I think the sweet spot will be between 6 and 10 models for the majority of armies. I really do. Hordes, I'm not entirely convinced that large units are going to do very well. However, this doesn't mean we will see a complete reduction of horde units. I mean, large stratagems will still work on those large units, and blast weapons are more expensive points-wise for most units that take them. The exception being things like frag missiles and missile launchers that are actually getting cheaper on infantry. But then that's a different element altogether. That's encouraging the opponent to take infantry models in their Space Marine armies, which are inherently not as dangerous, especially if they've got 1 wound and only 3+ armor saves, such as Devastator squads or Tactical Marines. So I wouldn't worry too much about this factor. Thunderfire cannons, they're expensive now. We're not going to see 3 in every army, competitively speaking. Same as whirlwinds, you might see 1 or 2. So you shouldn't have to worry too much if you have loads of other things as target saturation, if you do want your orc horde to have 2 big units of 30 strong boys. Most likely we will see 1 big unit of those, maybe 2, to ensure that someone can get the use out of them. But overall, like I say, most people will stick to 6 to 10 models. I think Tyranids, Greenskins and Genestealer Colts will all have the odd unit that is really large in it. Although I think Genestealer Colt often like using, they like using multiple support units. They call it MSU, smaller units, all around the table causing havoc. So it depends on what kind of army they're going to build. But overall, the Horde armies will still have a place for Horde, and that is because they have large stratagem support. Also, if you want to protect your characters, having a 5-strong unit of boys is not going to protect them for very long. A couple of Stormbolters can bring that unit below 3, and that unit is not going to protect any characters. You could have 10 of those units, and all you have to do is reduce each unit by 3, and that's 30 boys instead of 50. Well, a lot less than that, but that's 30 boys dead instead of 47, and then all of a sudden the unit is too small to actually protect the character. For most armies, Space Marines, we're going to see their units between 5 and 10 strong. We will see a few 10 strong units, and I actually heartily recommend that, because with some of the mission rules, you want to get your models around the table, And 10 intercessors or 10 tactical marines in a rhino can actually provide a lot of support that can use stratagem support and bonuses from characters in one area of the battlefield, whilst also being relatively cheap points costs. You're going to need larger numbers if you want to combat people's outflanking units with your own numbers, not because you actually have a move that you can do, but because people have to chew through these numbers. And if you just have little small units dotted around the table, you're not going to be able to prevent someone coming in and dictating how they want to play the game to you using the outflank rules. Remember, if your opponent wants to take lots of troops in lots of small units, you can always choose the right victory condition in your secondary objectives that can end up scoring the most amount of points. So there is a call for having a more balanced combined arms approach to be able to prevent the opponent from just choosing the right secondary and wiping you out with victory points and then scoring an unsurmountable lead. This is why I think a few small units in, an elite heavy army like Space Marines or Eldari, you might have a few small units, and then you'll have a few 10 strong units that are assault forces or otherwise, taking objectives and holding them. 10 Terminators, Cataphractii ones, can teleport onto an objective or near an objective and be very hard to shift, especially with all the stratagem support they can have. 10 Vanguard Veterans, they jump over all the intervening terrain and they're incredibly powerful in close combat. Again, you're going to want those numbers. 10 Sanguinian Guard or Death Company, similarly, they're going to want those numbers. So worrying about blast is not the way forward. For other armies, such as Eldari, they are going to need 10 strong units in certain places. Their assault forces will need to be larger units because they suffer losses on the way in. You suffer losses in close combat. You're going to lose a lot of utility for the unit and hitting power if you don't have slightly larger units. Orcs, I think, are going to need a couple of big units. So are Tyranids. You're going to need these units to hold objectives, to soak up firepower, to basically be an attention sponge so that the blast weapons and the other powerful weapons are not firing at other things. I mean, consider a battle cannon from a Lehman Russ is a blast weapon that is going to do a number on a Tyranid unit that is such as Hormagaunts, that is a horde. On the other hand, do you want those shots from that battle cannon hitting your Carnifex and killing it? You probably don't. You probably would actually rather sacrifice the blast effect on your Hormagaunts than losing your Carnifex. So I highly recommend not just dismissing all large units out of hand because of a few seemingly bad rules for them. Probably the clearest advice I can give is think of the victory conditions. If you're up against your own army across the table, how would you score victory points? And if you look at it and think, oh, I'd probably kill all those small units really easily, well, that's a weakness in your army. Doesn't mean that you can't have a weakness in your army and win games, but it is something you have to think about. In summary, to reiterate my point, I believe units are going to generally be the sizes between 6 and 10. That is the usual average, with a few outlying units that will be large horde type units. You'll still want 15 looters in your orc army to take advantage of that shooting. And if you've got 15 looters, you don't want them to get blasted off the table, so you're probably going to have to take 2 units of 30 strong boys that are marching up the table, taking up all the attention, or teleporter in, or the jump, all sorts of options. Similarly, you're going to want to think very carefully about your Space Marine army. Are you really that scared of plasma cannons that you don't want to take any 10 strong units? If you don't take any 10 strong units, your units will die quickly anyway to those plasma cannons. They just won't all die in one go, but the person's still going to score victory points from you. Do you want to protect your characters? I think most armies are going to need to protect characters a lot more than they used to because of this change in what constitutes protection. Look out, sir. Units of 2 strong are not going to protect anyone. So towards the end of the game, when you have remnant models from a battle further up the field, say you had a little skirmish and the 2 units are down to 3 men, one's down to 2 men, and then someone's just got to kill a handful of models and then he can shoot the complete backfield of characters that are hiding. So ultimately, unit sizes I don't believe are going to change too much. I think we will see a small change in that some people will focus on certain sized armies. And, you know, it does pay if you're trying to wring out a little bit of competitiveness of your army as best you can. But remember, larger units get more benefit to stratagem support. They get more benefit from the aura abilities of your characters. And also, they actually take more effort to get rid of. Therefore, protecting the characters behind and protecting other units. If we're talking about target saturation, protecting other units from getting nuked as well. So don't dismiss out of hand just because you're worried about the unit coherency check, which I kind of talked about earlier, and how it shouldn't be too much of a problem, or blast weapons, why you don't want to take larger units. I really think they're going to be worthwhile in 40k. Just you have to think a bit carefully. You don't have to say, well, you know, massive units, that's the way forward, because there are some weaknesses to them, as I've mentioned. So clever play, clever planning of your army, and clever army list building is the way forward, I believe. Anyway, that's it from me. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Please like and subscribe, and I'll get back to you all soon. Peace out.